There's a truth no one dares to say out loud. Sometimes the person who seems most confident is the one hiding the deepest fear. Matteo knew this well. 34 years old, owner of a small bookstore in the heart of Rome, he had built his life around books because other people's stories were easier to manage than his own. He'd learned early that women looked at him with a certain kind of interest, an interest he recognized, but that only made him feel more alone. Because how do you tell someone you're not what they think? How do you explain that behind the appearance of confidence, there's just a boy who never learned to let go? Until one autumn evening, when leaves danced on the wet cobblestones, she walked into his bookstore, and everything Matteo thought he knew about himself began to crumble. If this story touches your heart, subscribe to the channel and leave a like. Comment where you're listening from, and if you feel it was really worth it, consider becoming a member to get early access to upcoming stories. Your support makes all the difference. The bookstore was called Suspended Pages and was nestled between a vintage cafe and an antique frame shop on Via del Governo Vecchio. It was the kind of place where time seemed to move differently, where the smell of aged paper mixed with the coffee Matteo always made too strong. The walls were covered with shelves reaching to the ceiling, with sliding wooden ladders that allowed access to the highest volumes. There were burgundy velvet armchairs scattered here and there, lamps with fabric shades creating pools of warm light, and an old gramophone playing vinyl jazz most afternoons. Matteo had inherited the place from his uncle Giacomo, a man who had dedicated 50 years to literature, and who had taught Matteo that every book had a soul, a voice, a destiny, and that every reader deserved to find the book that would change their life. Matteo ran the bookstore with the same reverence. He knew every volume, every author, every story. He could recommend the perfect book for any mood, any moment in life. But he couldn't write his own story. He was an attractive man. This was undeniable. 6'1", brown hair always slightly messy, hazel eyes that seemed to read into people with the same attention he read his favorite books. He had the hands of someone who worked with delicacy, long fingers always stained with ink. He wore linen shirts, slightly wrinkled, dark jeans, and the kind of leather shoes that improved with age. He had a kind smile, a bit melancholic, that made the hearts of women who entered the shop beat faster. And they entered often. They pretended to look for a book, but they were looking for him. Matteo knew it. He had learned to recognize the signs, the way they lingered longer than necessary, how they always found an excuse to return, the glances that lasted a second too long. There had been propositions, direct, indirect, implied. A regular customer had left her number on a note hidden in a poetry book. Another had asked if he wanted to grab wine after closing. A third had been even more explicit, whispering in his ear as he handed her a novel that she knew exactly what she wanted, and that he seemed like the kind of man who could give it to her. Matteo had always declined. Kindly, respectfully, but firmly. Not because he wasn't interested, not because he didn't feel desire, but because he was afraid of disappointing, afraid of not measuring up, afraid they would discover the truth. Matteo was 34 years old and could count on one hand the intimate experiences he'd had, and none of those had been what women seemed to expect from him. The first time had been in university, with a classmate. She was confident, experienced, knew exactly what she wanted. Matteo had been clumsy, nervous, too quick. She had smiled kindly, but he had seen the disappointment in her eyes. They never spoke again after that night. The second time, a few years later, with a colleague from a summer job. She too had expectations. She too had been disappointed. Not by his appearance, not by his kindness, but by his inexperience, his inability to be what everyone thought he was. After that, Matteo stopped trying. He convinced himself it was easier this way. Safer. He poured himself into the bookstore, into his books, into other people's lives. He became the man everyone thought he was on the outside. Confident, charming, put together. While inside he carried the shame of not knowing how to be intimate, not knowing how to let someone in, not knowing how to be vulnerable without falling apart. The autumn evening when everything changed started like any other. It was nearly 7. The sky outside turning that deep purple that only Rome knows how to create. Matteo was restocking the poetry section when he heard the door chime. He looked up, and time stopped. She stood in the doorway, rain droplets clinging to her dark hair, her coat damp at the shoulders. She was petite, maybe 5'4", with an oval face and eyes so dark they seemed almost black. But it wasn't her beauty that struck him, though she was beautiful. It was the way she looked around the bookstore, as if she were entering a sanctuary, as if she understood that this place was sacred. "Good evening," Matteo said, his voice coming out rougher than he intended. "Can I help you find something?" She turned to him, and when their eyes met, something shifted in the air, something he couldn't name but could feel in his chest. "I hope so," she said softly. Her voice had a musical quality, like a cello note held just long enough to resonate. "I'm looking for something to help me disappear for a while." Matteo felt his heart skip. He understood that need intimately. "What kind of disappearing?" he asked, moving closer. "The kind where you forget who you're supposed to be," she answered, pulling off her damp coat. "Where you can just be without anyone expecting anything." Matteo studied her for a moment. There was something fragile about her, but not weak. Like porcelain that had been fired at such high temperatures, it became stronger than steel. "I think I have exactly what you need," he said. "Follow me." He led her through the maze of shelves to a quiet corner near the back, where he kept his most precious finds. He ran his fingers along the spines, searching until he found it. A worn copy of The Leopard by Giuseppe Tomasi di Lampedusa. "This," he said, handing it to her. "It's about transformation, about time, about understanding that everything must change, for anything to remain the same." She took the book carefully, as if it were made of glass. Her fingers brushed his for just a second, and Matteo felt electricity shoot through him. "Have you read it?" she asked. "3 times, he admitted, and each time I was a different person by the end." She smiled then, a small, genuine smile that transformed her entire face. "I'm Chiara," she said. "Matteo." He hesitated, then asked, "Would you like some coffee?" I was just about to make some. She looked at him with those impossibly dark eyes. "I'd love that." They sat in the 2 armchairs near the window, while rain began to fall harder outside, creating a curtain that separated them from the rest of the world. Matteo made his 2 strong coffee, and Chiara didn't complain. They talked about books at first, the safe territory. She loved Calvino, Pavese, Ferrante. She read poetry in the morning and fiction at night. She believed that books were portals to other lives, other possibilities. "So do I," Matteo said quietly. "Sometimes I think I've lived more lives in books than in my own life." Chiara looked at him with an intensity that made him want to look away, but he held her gaze. "Why?" she asked simply. Matteo found himself wanting to tell her. This woman he'd known for 20 minutes. He wanted to confess everything. But instead he said, "Because books don't expect you to be anyone other than a reader." She nodded slowly. "I understand that. People always expect you to be someone. Someone confident. Someone who has it all figured out. Someone who doesn't feel lost." "Exactly," Matteo breathed. They talked for 2 hours. The rain continued, and Matteo didn't open the door for any other customers. They sat in their warm cocoon of lamplight and coffee and whispered conversations about fear and loneliness and the masks everyone wears. When Chiara finally stood to leave, Matteo felt a panic in his chest. "When will you come back?" he asked, and immediately regretted how desperate it sounded. She smiled. "Tomorrow," she offered, "to tell you what I think of the book." "Tomorrow," Matteo agreed, and he felt something he hadn't felt in years. Hope. Chiara came back the next day, and the day after that, and the day after that. Each time they talked a little longer. Each time, Matteo felt himself opening up in ways he'd forgotten were possible. She told him about her life, about growing up in Tuscany, about losing her mother young, about moving to Rome for university and never leaving, about working as a translator, spending her days converting other people's words into different languages, always caught between worlds, never quite belonging to any of them. And Matteo, slowly, carefully, told her about himself, about inheriting the bookstore, about his uncle who raised him after his parents died in a car accident when he was 12, about learning that books were safer than people, that stories were more predictable than relationships. He didn't tell her everything, not yet, but he told her enough that she began to see past the facade. 3 weeks into their daily meetings, Chiara arrived with rain in her hair again. Matteo had started to love the way she looked when she first came in, slightly disheveled, her guard not quite up yet. He'd made her favorite coffee, a cappuccino with just a hint of cinnamon. But today she didn't sit in her usual chair. She stood in front of him, close enough that he could smell her perfume, something light and floral that reminded him of spring. "Matteo," she said quietly, "I need to tell you something." His heart clenched. Here it comes, he thought. She's going to say she met someone. She's going to say, "This has been nice, but it's time to move on." She's going to say goodbye. But instead, she said, "I think about you all the time. I wake up thinking about coming here. I go to sleep replaying our conversations. And I don't know what to do with these feelings, because I haven't felt them in so long, and they terrify me." Matteo stood frozen. Every word she'd just said echoed his own feelings so precisely, it was like she'd reached into his chest and pulled them out. "I think about you, too," he managed to say. "Every moment you're not here." Chiara's eyes filled with tears. "Then why haven't you touched me? Why haven't you kissed me? Why do you keep this distance between us like there's glass wall?" "Because I'm afraid," Matteo admitted, his voice breaking. "Because you think I'm someone I'm not. Because everyone thinks I'm confident and experienced and knows what he's doing. And the truth is, I don't. I don't know how to be what you need." Chiara reached up and touched his face. Her hand was small and warm against his cheek. "What do you think I need?" "I don't know," Matteo whispered. "Someone who knows what they're doing. Someone who can make you feel the way you deserve to feel. Someone who isn't terrified of disappointing you." Chiara's thumb traced his cheekbone gently. "Matteo, I don't need someone who has all the answers. I need someone who's honest, someone who sees me, someone who makes me feel safe. You do that. You've done that from the first moment I walked in here." "But you don't understand," Matteo said, his hands trembling. "I'm not experienced. I don't know how to be intimate with someone. I've tried before, and I've failed, and I can't bear the thought of failing with you." Chiara stepped closer, so close he could feel the warmth of her body. "Do you think I'm experienced?" she asked softly. "Do you think I know what I'm doing?" Matteo blinked. "I assumed," he started. "You assumed," she interrupted. "Everyone assumes. They look at me and think I must have it figured out. But Matteo, I've been with exactly 2 people in my entire life, and both times I felt like I was performing, like I was trying to be what they wanted instead of just being myself. Both times I felt alone even when I wasn't. Matteo stared at her. You? But you seem so confident. She laughed, but it was a sad sound. We're all pretending, Matteo. All of us. We're all terrified we're not enough, that we're too much, that we'll be rejected if anyone sees who we really are. So we build these walls, and we hide and we convince ourselves it's safer this way. But it's not safer. It's just lonelier. Matteo reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and touched her face the way she was touching his. What if we stopped pretending, he asked. What if we just tried to be honest, even if it's messy, even if we don't know what we're doing? Chiara's breath caught. I'd like that. I'd like that so much. Then let me try something, Matteo said. And if it's not right, if I do it wrong, will you tell me? Always, Chiara promised. Matteo leaned down slowly. His heart was pounding so hard he was sure she could hear it. His hands were shaking, but he didn't stop. He pressed his lips to hers, softly, carefully, as if she were made of something precious that might break. The kiss was gentle, uncertain, questioning. But when Chiara's hands moved to his chest, when she made a small sound in the back of her throat, when she pressed closer, Matteo felt something shift inside him. This was different from those other times. This was real. They kissed for a long time, slowly exploring, learning each other. There was no rush, no pressure, no performance. Just 2 people being honest about their desire and their fear. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing harder, Matteo rested his forehead against hers. Come upstairs with me, he whispered. I live above the shop. Only if you want to, only if you're ready. Chiara's hands were trembling now, too. He could feel them shaking against his chest. I want to, she said. But I'm scared. Me too, Matteo admitted. We can be scared together. The apartment above the bookstore was small but warm. Books lined every wall, even in the bedroom. There was a large bed with white linens, a window overlooking the street, and soft lamps that created pools of gentle light. Matteo and Chiara stood in the middle of the room, both nervous, both wanting, both terrified. We don't have to do anything, Matteo said. We can just talk. We can just be here together. I know, Chiara said, but I want to try. With you, I want to try. Matteo cupped her face in his hands. Tell me if I do anything you don't like. Tell me if I hurt you. Tell me what feels good. She nodded, tears gathering in her eyes. You too. Promise me you'll tell me too. I promise, Matteo said. And then he kissed her again, deeper this time. His hands moved to the buttons of her shirt, and he undid them slowly, one at a time, watching her face, making sure. Chiara's hands went to his shirt too, and they undressed each other carefully, reverently, as if they were unwrapping something sacred. When they were both bare, Matteo laid her down on the bed, gently. He was shaking, his heart racing, terrified he would do something wrong. But then, Chiara reached up and pulled him down to her. Kiss me, she whispered. Just keep kissing me. So he did. He kissed her mouth, her neck, her shoulders. He took his time, paying attention to every sound she made, every movement of her body. He'd read enough, imagined enough to know the theory. But this was different. This was Chiara. This was real. This mattered more than anything had ever mattered. Chiara, he breathed against her skin. Tell me what you need. You, she whispered. Just you. Just this. Just us being honest. Matteo's hand moved down her body slowly. He watched her face, learning what made her breath catch, what made her eyes flutter closed, what made her press closer. And when he touched her intimately, when he felt her warmth and her desire, he realized something profound. This wasn't about performance. This wasn't about being experienced or knowing all the right moves. This was about being present, about paying attention, about caring more about her pleasure than his own ego. "Are you okay?" he asked softly, his fingers moving gently. "Yes," Kiara breathed. "Yes, don't stop." So he didn't stop. He explored slowly, carefully, asking questions with his touch and listening to her body's answers. And when he finally moved over her, when he began to join their bodies, he saw her tense. He stopped immediately. "What's wrong?" he asked. "Nothing," she said quickly. Then she admitted, "I'm just nervous. It's been so long, and I'm afraid it will hurt." Matteo kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her lips. "We'll go slow," he promised. "As slow as you need. And if it hurts, if you want to stop, we stop. No questions. No guilt. Okay?" Kiara nodded, her hands gripping his shoulders. "Okay." Matteo positioned himself carefully and began to enter her slowly, watching her face the entire time. He saw her wince slightly and stopped immediately. "Breathe," he whispered. "Just breathe with me." They breathed together, their chests rising and falling in sync. And slowly Kiara relaxed. He moved a fraction more, still watching, still careful. This was nothing like his previous experiences. Those had been rushed, awkward, driven by nervousness and the pressure to perform. This was different. This was intimate in a way he'd never experienced. Not just physical intimacy, but emotional nakedness. They were both vulnerable, both scared, both trusting each other with their deepest fears. "Matteo," Kiara whispered. "I'm okay. You can move." "Are you sure?" he asked. She nodded, and he saw tears sliding down her temples into her hair. But they weren't tears of pain. They were tears of relief, of emotion, of finally feeling safe enough to be completely vulnerable. Matteo began to move slowly, carefully, constantly checking her face. And gradually, he felt her body respond, her legs wrapped around him, pulling him closer. Her hands moved from his shoulders to his back, holding him. Small sounds began to escape her lips, soft gasps and sighs that went straight through him. "Is this okay?" he asked again. "It's more than okay," Kiara breathed. "It's perfect. It's exactly what I needed." They moved together slowly, learning each other's rhythm, finding a pace that felt right for both of them. Matteo felt overwhelmed by sensation and emotion. This was what intimacy was supposed to be, not performance, not proving anything, just two people sharing vulnerability and trust and desire. He felt Kiara's body beginning to tense in a different way, her breathing becoming shorter, her fingers digging into his back. "I'm close," she gasped. "Matteo, I'm so close." "Let go," he whispered. "I've got you. Just let go." And she did. Kiara's body arched beneath him, her eyes squeezed shut, a cry escaping her lips that was both surprised and relieved, as if she'd been holding something in for years, and finally released it. Watching her, feeling her, Matteo felt his own release approaching. He'd been so focused on her, he'd almost forgotten himself. But now the pleasure crashed over him like a wave, and he buried his face in her neck, whispering her name like a prayer. They stayed connected for a long moment afterward, both trembling, both overwhelmed. When Matteo finally moved to lie beside her, pulling her close, he felt tears on his own cheeks. He wasn't embarrassed. For once, he wasn't ashamed. He was just present, just grateful, just completely and utterly himself. "Are you crying?" Kiara asked softly, turning to face him. Matteo nodded. "Is that strange?" She touched his face tenderly. "No, it's beautiful. it means you felt it too." "What did I feel?" he asked. "That we weren't performing," Kiara said. "That we were just being. Just two people being honest and vulnerable and real. I've never felt that before." "Never." "Me neither," Matteo admitted. "I was so afraid I'd disappoint you. I was afraid you'd realize I didn't know what I was doing and you'd regret choosing me." Chiara laughed softly. "Matteo, that was the most intimate experience of my entire life. Not despite your inexperience, but because of your honesty. Because you paid attention. Because you cared more about me than about proving something." They lay together for hours, talking and touching and learning. Chiara told him about her past experiences, about men who had treated her like an object, like a conquest, like someone to perform for, about how she'd felt used and disconnected even in moments that should have been intimate, about how she'd convinced herself that's just how it was, that you couldn't have both desire and emotional connection. But this was different, she said. This was what I always hoped it could be. Matteo told her about his fears, about the women who had expected him to be someone he wasn't, about the shame he'd carried for years about his inexperience, about convincing himself he was better off alone, because at least alone he couldn't disappoint anyone. "But you didn't disappoint me," Chiara insisted. "You made me feel cherished. You made me feel safe. You made me feel like I could be completely myself without judgment. That's worth more than all the experience in the world." As night deepened into early morning, they finally fell asleep tangled together, exhausted and content. When Matteo woke, sunlight was streaming through the windows, and Chiara was still in his arms, her hair spread across his chest, her breathing slow and even. He watched her sleep and felt something he'd thought he'd never feel. Hope for the future. Not just hope that she'd stay, but hope that he could build a life with someone. That he could be loved. That he could love. That he was enough exactly as he was. Chiara stirred, her eyes opening slowly. She smiled when she saw him watching her. "Hi," she whispered. "Hi," Matteo said. "Regrets?" "None," Chiara said firmly. "You?" Matteo pulled her closer. "Not a single one." Over the following weeks, their relationship deepened in ways that surprised both of them. They spent every evening together, either in the bookstore after closing or in Matteo's apartment. They cooked together, read together, talked for hours about everything and nothing. And they continued to explore their physical intimacy, each time learning something new, becoming more comfortable, more confident. Matteo discovered he loved making Chiara laugh in bed, loved the way she'd giggle when he kissed that spot on her ribs that was ticklish. He loved the way she'd gasp his name when he found new ways to please her. He loved the way afterward she'd curl into him, like she never wanted to let go. And most of all, he loved that there was no pressure, no performance, no pretense. Just honesty. Chiara taught him to slow down even more, to savor every moment, to understand that intimacy wasn't a race to completion, but a journey to explore together. She showed him what she liked, what made her feel safe, what made her feel desired. And in teaching him, she learned about herself. She discovered she could voice her needs without fear of judgment. She learned her body was capable of pleasure she'd never imagined. She realized that vulnerability wasn't weakness. It was the only path to real connection. 3 months into their relationship, Chiara arrived at the bookstore with a nervous energy that Matteo recognized immediately. "What's wrong?" he asked, setting down the book he'd been cataloging. "Nothing's wrong," she said quickly. "But I need to talk to you about something." They sat in their usual chairs by the window, and Chiara took his hands. "I got a job offer," she said. "A translation position with a publishing house in Milan. It's an incredible opportunity. Something I've wanted for years. But it would mean moving." Matteo felt his heart sink. Milan was only a few hours away by train, but it might as well have been another world. "How long?" he asked. "Permanently," Chiara said, watching his face. "It's a full-time position. But Matteo, I don't want to go. Or rather, I want the job. But I don't want to lose this. I don't want to lose you. You shouldn't give up an opportunity because of me," Matteo said, even though every fiber of his being wanted to ask her to stay. "I'm not giving it up," Chiara said. "I'm asking you to come with me." Matteo stared at her. "What?" "Come to Milan," she repeated. "You can open a bookstore there. Or work in one of the universities. They're always looking for rare book experts. Or do something completely different. I don't care. I just want us to be together." "But we've only been together 3 months," Matteo protested. "That's too soon to make such a big decision." Chiara squeezed his hands. "Is it? Because I know how I feel about you. I know that waking up next to you is the best part of every day. I know that I want to build a life with you. I know that finding someone who sees me completely and loves me anyway is rare. And I'm not willing to let that go just because it's only been 3 months." "What about the bookstore?" Matteo asked. "Your uncle left it to you." "He left it to me so I'd have a place in the world," Chiara said. "But maybe my place isn't this bookstore. Maybe my place is wherever you are." Matteo felt tears burning in his eyes. "I'm afraid," he admitted. "What if it doesn't work? What if we move, and then you realize I'm not what you thought? What if the distance changes things?" Chiara moved from her chair to his lap, wrapping her arms around his neck. "Then we'll deal with it. Together." "But Matteo, staying here doesn't guarantee anything either. Relationships are always a risk. The question is, are you willing to take that risk with me?" Matteo looked at this woman who had changed everything, who had seen past his walls and loved what she found, who had been patient with his fears and honest about her own, who had taught him that vulnerability was strength, that inexperience wasn't failure, that being himself was not just enough, but everything. "Yes," he said, "I'll come with you. I'll take that risk, because losing you would be worse than any fear I have." Chiara's face lit up with joy. "Really?" "Really," Matteo confirmed. "We'll figure it out together." They moved to Milan 2 months later. Matteo sold the bookstore to a young couple who promised to keep its spirit alive. It was painful to let go, but it was also liberating. For the first time in his life, Matteo was choosing something for himself, not accepting what circumstance had given him. He was choosing love. He was choosing vulnerability. He was choosing to trust that he was worthy of good things. Milan was different from Rome, faster, more modern, more international. But Matteo and Chiara built a life there together. They found a small apartment in the Navigli district, near the canals, with high ceilings and windows that let in floods of light. Chiara threw herself into her new job, translating contemporary Italian fiction into English and French. Matteo took his time, exploring the city, visiting bookstores and libraries, figuring out what he wanted to do next. He eventually found work as a consultant for rare book collections at the Biblioteca Ambrosiana, one of the oldest libraries in Italy. It was perfect for him, combining his love of books with his expertise, but without the isolation of running his own shop. He worked with other bibliophiles, learning from them, sharing his knowledge. He found himself opening up to people in ways he never had before. The confidence Chiara had helped him build extended beyond their relationship into every area of his life. Their intimate life continued to deepen and evolve. They learned each other's bodies completely, discovering new ways to bring each other pleasure. But more importantly, they learned each other's souls. They developed their own language of touch and look and breath. They could communicate entire conversations without words. They knew when the other needed comfort, needed space, needed connection. Matteo discovered he had a sensual side he'd never known existed, not because he suddenly became experienced or skilled, but because he finally felt safe enough to explore, to try things, to fail and laugh and try again. Chiara loved his willingness to learn, his attention to detail, his genuine care for her pleasure. She told him often that he was the best lover she'd ever had, not because of technique, but because of presence, because he made her feel seen, desired, cherished, because every touch carried meaning, because intimacy with him was about connection, not performance. One evening, about a year after they'd moved to Milan, they were lying in bed after making love, both drowsy and content. Matteo was tracing patterns on Chiara's bare shoulder when she suddenly said, "I want to tell you something I've never told anyone." Matteo stilled, giving her his full attention. "You can tell me anything," he said. Chiara took a deep breath. "The first time we were together, she started. When I said I was nervous and scared it would hurt, I wasn't just nervous. I was terrified. Because the last time I'd tried to be intimate with someone, it did hurt. A lot. And he didn't care. He didn't stop. He said I was being dramatic, that I needed to relax, that I was ruining it." Matteo felt rage surge through him, but he kept his voice gentle. "I'm so sorry that happened to you. That should never have happened." "I know," Chiara said, tears gathering in her eyes. "And I almost didn't tell you, because I didn't want you to think I was damaged or broken." "But you're not," Matteo said firmly. "You're not damaged. You were hurt by someone who should have protected you and didn't. That's on him, not on you." Chiara nodded, tears falling now. "I know that intellectually. But emotionally, I carried so much shame. I thought there was something wrong with me, that I couldn't do it right, that I was too sensitive, too difficult. When we were together that first time," she continued, "and you stopped the moment you saw me tense. When you asked if I was okay. When you said we could stop any time, I cried afterward, not just from relief, but because I finally understood what it should have been like all along. You showed me what respect looks like, what caring for another person's well-being looks like. And that changed something fundamental in me." Matteo pulled her closer, his heart aching for her. "I'm glad I could give you that. But Chiara, you gave me something just as important. You gave me permission to be inexperienced, to not know everything, to learn and make mistakes and grow. You never made me feel inadequate." "We saved each other," Chiara whispered. "Didn't we?" "I think we did," Matteo agreed. 2 years into their relationship, on an autumn evening much like the one when they first met, Matteo took Chiara back to Rome. He'd made arrangements with the new owners of his old bookstore to close early and let him have the space for an evening. When they arrived, Chiara was confused. "Why are we here?" she asked. "Because this is where our story began," Matteo said. "And I wanted it to be here when I ask you if you'll let our story continue forever." He dropped to one knee in the middle of the bookstore, between the shelves that held so many stories, in the place where he'd learned to hope again. Chiara's hands flew to her mouth. "Chiara," Matteo said, his voice shaking with emotion, "you walked into this bookstore 2 years ago looking to disappear, and instead, you made me visible. You saw me when I'd spent years hiding. You loved me when I couldn't love myself. You taught me that vulnerability isn't weakness, that inexperience isn't failure, that being exactly who I am is not just enough, but everything." He pulled out a simple ring, a small emerald surrounded by tiny diamonds. "You are my home, my sanctuary, my favorite story. Will you marry me?" Chiara was crying too hard to speak at first. She nodded frantically, then managed to gasp out, "Yes." "Yes, absolutely. Yes." Matteo slid the ring on her finger, and they kissed there among the books. Both crying, both laughing, both completely overwhelmed with joy. They married 6 months later in a small ceremony in Tuscany, near where Chiara had grown up. It was intimate, just close friends and family, in a small chapel surrounded by vineyards and rolling hills. Matteo's hand shook when he placed the ring on Chiara's finger, just as they had shaken that first time he touched her. But this time, the shaking wasn't from fear. It was from the overwhelming rightness of the moment. This was where he was supposed to be. This was who he was supposed to be with. This was the life he was supposed to live. In his vows, Matteo said, "I spent so many years believing I wasn't enough, that I was too inexperienced, too uncertain, too afraid. But you taught me that those things don't matter. What matters is being honest, being present, being willing to grow. You loved me not despite my flaws, but through them. And I promise to spend every day of our lives together doing the same for you." Chiara's vows were equally tearful. She said, "You gave me back something I thought I'd lost forever. The ability to trust, to be vulnerable without fear, to take up space without apologizing. You showed me that real love isn't about perfection or performance. It's about acceptance, about seeing someone completely and choosing them anyway. And I choose you, Matteo. Today and every day. I choose you." Their wedding night was tender and unhurried. They'd been living together for over a year, their physical relationship well established and deeply satisfying. But there was something different about that night, something sacred about the commitment they'd just made. They made love slowly, reverently, as if sealing the promises they'd spoken. Afterward, lying in each other's arms in the small hotel overlooking the vineyards, Matteo said, "I never thought I'd have this. I never thought someone would want to commit their whole life to me." Chiara kissed his chest. "I never thought I'd find someone I felt safe enough with to commit my whole life to." "We're lucky." "Incredibly lucky," Matteo agreed. They settled into married life back in Milan, with an ease that surprised them both. They'd been worried that marriage might change things, might add pressure or expectations. But instead, it just deepened what they already had. The commitment gave them even more freedom to be themselves, to grow, to change. 3 years into their marriage, Chiara came home from work one day with a nervous expression that Matteo had learned to recognize. "What's on your mind?" he asked, setting down the book he'd been reading. "I've been thinking about children," Chiara said, sitting next to him on the couch. "And I know we've talked about it before, and we both said maybe someday. But I think I'm ready. I think I want to try." Matteo's heart swelled. "Are you sure?" he asked. "Because there's no rush. We have time." "I'm sure," Chiara said. "I look at you, at the life we've built, at the man you are, and I want to create a family with you. I want to watch you be a father. I want our children to grow up with your gentleness, your patience, your ability to really see people." Matteo felt tears prick his eyes. "I want that too," he admitted. "I want to have children with you. I want to build that life. But I'm also terrified. What if I'm not good at it? What if I don't know what I'm doing?" Chiara laughed softly. "Matteo, no one knows what they're doing when they become parents. But I've watched you with books, with people, with me. You approach everything with care and attention and willingness to learn. That's all any child needs." "So we'll try?" Matteo asked. "We'll try," Chiara confirmed, "but no pressure. Whatever happens, happens." It took them 8 months to conceive. 8 months of hope and disappointment, of trying to stay relaxed while desperately wanting it to work. When Kiara finally got a positive test, they both cried. They held each other in the bathroom, staring at the little stick with its 2 pink lines, overwhelmed with joy and terror in equal measure. The pregnancy was challenging. Kiara had severe morning sickness for the first trimester, exhaustion throughout. Matteo took care of her with the same attention he'd always given her, making sure she ate, holding her hair back when she was sick, rubbing her feet when they swelled. "I'm sorry I'm so miserable," Kiara said one evening, tears streaming down her face over something trivial. The hormones made her cry at everything. "You're not miserable," Matteo said gently. "You're growing a human. You're allowed to feel however you feel." Their daughter was born on a snowy January morning. The labor was long and difficult, and Matteo stayed by Kiara's side the entire time, holding her hand, breathing with her, telling her how strong she was, how proud he was, how much he loved her. When their daughter finally emerged, tiny and perfect and screaming, Matteo cut the cord with shaking hands. The nurse placed the baby on Kiara's chest, and they both stared at her in wonder. "She's perfect," Kiara whispered. "She's so perfect." "We made her," Matteo said, awe in his voice. "We made a whole person." They named her Lucia, after Matteo's mother. She had dark hair like Kiara and hazel eyes like Matteo. She was healthy and strong and had lungs that could wake the dead. Those first few months were the hardest of Matteo's life. The sleep deprivation, the constant needs, the fear that he was doing everything wrong. But he approached fatherhood the same way he'd approached everything else with Kiara, with honesty, vulnerability, and willingness to learn. He wasn't a perfect father. He made mistakes. He put diapers on backward, couldn't figure out the baby carrier, panicked the first time Lucia got a fever. But he was present. He was attentive. He shared all the responsibilities with Kiara. He woke up for night feedings, changed diapers without complaint, walked Lucia around the apartment for hours when she couldn't sleep. And slowly, he learned. He learned to read Lucia's cries, to understand what each sound meant. He learned to soothe her with his voice, to make her laugh by making silly faces, to help her fall asleep by reading her books, even though she couldn't possibly understand them yet. One night, when Lucia was about 4 months old, Matteo was holding her in the rocking chair in her nursery. Kiara had gone to bed exhausted, and he'd volunteered to take the night shift. Lucia had been fussy all evening, refusing to settle. But now, in the quiet dark, she was finally calm, her tiny hand wrapped around his finger, her eyes starting to droop. Matteo looked down at her. This perfect little person he and Kiara had created, and felt overwhelmed with love. "I was so afraid I wouldn't be good at this," he whispered to her. "That I wouldn't know what to do. That I'd fail you the way I thought I'd failed at everything else. But your mom taught me something important. She taught me that you don't have to be perfect. You don't have to know everything. You just have to be present. You just have to care. You just have to try." Lucia yawned, her little mouth opening wide. "And I promise you, baby girl," Matteo continued, his voice thick with emotion, "I will always try. I will always be here. I will always love you exactly as you are. And I will teach you what your mother taught me, that you are enough, exactly as you are." As Lucia grew, so did their family's bonds. Kiara returned to work part-time, translating from home so she could be with Lucia more. Matteo adjusted his hours at the library to share childcare responsibilities equally. They figured it out together, just as they'd figured out everything else. When Lucia was 2, they had a son, Marco. The second time around was easier, not because parenting got simpler, but because they'd learned to trust themselves. They knew they'd make mistakes, and that was okay. They knew they didn't have all the answers, and that was okay too. Watching Matteo with their children made Chiara fall in love with him even deeper. He was patient when they were difficult, playful when they needed fun, steady when they needed security. He read to them every night, creating voices for characters that made them shriek with laughter. He taught them about books and music and art. He showed them how to be kind, how to be curious, how to be themselves. One evening, when Lucia was 5 and Marco was 3, Matteo was putting them to bed. Lucia was at that age, where she asked endless questions about everything. "Papa," she asked as he tucked her in, "why do you always tell us we're perfect?" Matteo sat on the edge of her bed, smoothing her dark hair. "Because you are, sweetheart." "But Mama says nobody's perfect," Lucia pointed out. "Mama's right," Matteo agreed. "But here's the thing. You're perfect at being you. There's no one else in the whole world exactly like you. And that makes you perfectly Lucia. And perfectly Lucia is exactly who you're supposed to be." "Even when I make mistakes?" Lucia asked. "Especially when you make mistakes," Matteo said. "Because that's how you learn. That's how you grow. Papa makes mistakes too. You know." "Really?" Lucia's eyes widened. "All the time," Matteo admitted. "But I try to learn from them, and I never let them make me think I'm not good enough. Because I am good enough. And so are you. Always." Lucia thought about this for a moment. "Papa, did you always know you were good enough?" Matteo felt his throat tighten. "No, sweetheart. For a long time I thought I wasn't. I thought I was too different, too inexperienced, too much of some things, and not enough of others." "What changed?" Lucia asked. "I met your mama," Matteo said softly, "and she helped me see that being different isn't bad. That being inexperienced just means you have room to grow. That being exactly who you are is the most important thing of all." "I want to be exactly who I am," Lucia declared. "Good," Matteo said, kissing her forehead. "That's all I want for you. Just be Lucia. That's more than enough." After the children were asleep, Matteo found Chiara on the balcony of their apartment, looking out over the city lights. He wrapped his arms around her from behind, and she leaned back against him. "Lucia asked me an interesting question tonight," he said. He told Chiara about their conversation. When he finished, Chiara turned in his arms to face him. "You've come so far," she said, touching his face. "From the man who thought he wasn't enough to the man who teaches his children they're perfect as they are." "That's because of you," Matteo said. "You changed everything." "We changed each other," Chiara corrected. "You gave me safety. I gave you confidence. We both grew. That's what love does. It doesn't complete you. It creates space for you to complete yourself." Years passed. Lucia and Marco grew. The family faced challenges, normal life challenges, financial stress, work pressures, parenting difficulties, aging parents, health scares. But they faced everything together, with the same honesty and vulnerability that had always been the foundation of Matteo and Chiara's relationship. When Lucia was 10, she came home from school crying. A boy had made fun of her for being too sensitive, for crying when a character died in the book they were reading in class. Matteo sat with her, letting her cry, not rushing to fix it. "Being sensitive isn't a flaw," he told her when she'd calmed down. "It means you feel things deeply. It means you have empathy. The world needs more people who feel things deeply, not fewer." "But it hurts," Lucia sobbed, "when people make fun of me for being different." "I know," Matteo said. "Believe me, I know. But here's what I learned. The people who make fun of you for being different are usually the ones who are most afraid of being different themselves. They see something in you that they wish they had, and it scares them. So what do I do? Lucia asked. You stay exactly who you are, Matteo said firmly. You don't make yourself smaller to make others comfortable. You don't hide your feelings to avoid being mocked. You be brave enough to be sensitive in a world that sometimes punishes sensitivity. And you remember that the people who truly matter, the people who will love you for your whole life, are the ones who love you because you're different, not despite it. Like Mama loves you? Lucia asked. Exactly like Mama loves me, Matteo agreed. And like we both love you. When Marco was 8, he struggled with school. He had difficulty reading. Got frustrated easily. Started saying he was stupid. Matteo recognized that fear, that shame, that sense of being not enough. He worked with Marco patiently, never showing frustration, always encouraging. Learning things differently doesn't mean there's something wrong with you, he told Marco. It just means you need to find your own way. Some people learn by reading, some by doing, some by listening. We'll figure out your way. They worked together every evening, trying different approaches until they found what worked for Marco. Visual learning, hands-on projects, audiobooks. Slowly, Marco's confidence grew. He stopped saying he was stupid. He started saying he just learned differently. And that small shift in perspective changed everything. On Matteo and Chiara's 15th wedding anniversary, they left the children with Chiara's sister and went back to Rome for the weekend. They visited the old bookstore, now thriving under new ownership, but still maintaining the warm, sacred atmosphere Matteo had created. They stood in the same spot where Matteo had proposed, holding hands, remembering. 15 years, Chiara said softly. It feels like forever, and like yesterday at the same time. I know what you mean, Matteo said. Sometimes I still can't believe you chose me, that you keep choosing me. Matteo, Chiara said, turning to face him, I need you to understand something. I didn't just choose you 15 years ago. I choose you every single day. Every day, I wake up and choose you again. Not because I have to, but because I want to. Because you're still the kindest, most genuine, most present person I've ever known. Even after all these years, Matteo asked, even after seeing all my flaws? Especially after seeing all your flaws, Chiara said. Because I've also seen how you handle them, how you acknowledge mistakes, how you apologize to the kids when you lose your patience, how you ask for help when you need it, how you keep growing. That's what I fell in love with. Not perfection, but genuine humanity. They spent the night in the same hotel where they'd stayed after their wedding, making love with the ease and intimacy of long familiarity, but also with the passion that had never really dimmed. Afterward, lying in the dark, Matteo said, I sometimes think about that first night, when we were both so scared and uncertain. Do you? Chiara asked. All the time, Matteo said, because that night taught me something I've never forgotten. What? Chiara prompted. That vulnerability is the greatest strength we have, Matteo said. We were both so scared of being hurt, of being rejected, of not being enough. But we chose to be vulnerable anyway. We chose to trust each other with our fears. And that made everything else possible. The marriage, the children, the life we've built. It all started with being brave enough to be vulnerable. Chiara was quiet for a moment. Then she said, You know what I think about? I think about how you stopped. That first time when you saw me tense, you stopped immediately. You didn't get frustrated or angry or try to convince me it was fine. You just stopped and asked what I needed. That one moment, she continued, told me everything I needed to know about who you were. And every day since, you've proven it over and over. That you care more about my well-being than your own ego. That you listen more than you assume. That you're willing to adjust course when something isn't working. That's just basic decency, Matteo protested. No, Chiara said. It's not. Basic decency is rarer than you think. And the fact that you think it's normal, that you don't see it as anything special, that's part of why it's so special. When they returned home to Milan, to their children and their routines and their everyday life, something had shifted. Not in a dramatic way, but in a subtle deepening of appreciation for what they'd built together, for the family they'd created, for the love that had sustained them through everything. Years continued to pass. Lucia entered high school. Marco entered middle school. They both inherited their parents' love of reading, though in different ways. Lucia loved fiction, immersing herself in other worlds. Marco loved nonfiction, fascinated by how things worked. Both felt secure enough to be themselves, to pursue their interests without shame, to express their emotions without fear. That's your legacy, Chiara told Matteo one day as they watched the kids. Two confident, emotionally intelligent children who know they're loved unconditionally. That's our legacy, Matteo corrected. We did this together. On Matteo's 50th birthday, the family threw him a party. Friends, colleagues, Chiara's family, all gathered in their apartment that had been decorated by the children. There was food and wine and laughter. But the best moment came at the end of the night, after everyone had left and the children had gone to bed. Chiara handed Matteo a small wrapped box. "One more present," she said. Matteo opened it carefully. Inside was a leather journal, beautiful and well made. On the first page, Chiara had written, "For all the stories you never thought you'd get to live. Thank you for living them with me." Matteo looked at her, his eyes filling with tears. "This is perfect," he whispered. "I thought you could use it to write," Chiara said. "Not for anyone else, just for yourself. Your thoughts, your feelings, your experiences, your story. Because it's a story worth telling." That night, alone in his study while Chiara slept, Matteo opened the journal and began to write. He wrote about the loneliness of his younger years, about the fear he'd carried, about the shame of feeling inadequate. He wrote about the night Chiara walked into his bookstore and changed everything. He wrote about learning to be vulnerable, learning to trust, learning that inexperience wasn't failure but opportunity. He wrote about their first night together, about the trembling hands, about the tears of relief and joy, about how they'd built a life on honesty and patience and genuine care for each other. He wrote about marriage, about children, about all the small moments that had added up to a beautiful life. And then he wrote, "I spent so many years believing I wasn't enough, that I was too inexperienced, too uncertain, too afraid. But what I learned is that those things don't matter. What matters is being honest, being present, being willing to grow. I was never too inexperienced. I was just waiting for someone who valued presence over performance. Someone who wanted genuine connection more than practiced skill." "Chiara didn't save me," Matteo wrote. "We saved each other. She gave me permission to be myself, and I gave her permission to feel safe. Together, we built something neither of us could have built alone. And that's what love really is, not completing each other, but creating space for each other to become who we're meant to be." Matteo continued writing in the journal regularly. It became a practice, a way of processing his life, of understanding his journey. He wrote about the challenges they still faced, because life never stopped being complicated. He wrote about arguments with Chiara, about parenting difficulties, about work stress, about aging and mortality, and all the fears that came with them. But he also wrote about the joy. About Sunday mornings, with the whole family reading together on the couch. About the way Chiara still looked at him after all these years, with love and desire and deep friendship, about watching his children grow into themselves with confidence, about the peace that came from finally accepting himself completely. When Lucia was 17, preparing to leave for university, she asked Matteo for advice about relationships. She'd been dating someone for a few months, and things were getting serious. Matteo took her to a cafe, just the two of them, and they talked for hours. The most important thing, he told her, is that you feel safe. Not just physically safe, but emotionally safe. Safe to be yourself, to voice your needs, to say no, to change your mind. If someone makes you feel like you have to perform, like you have to be anyone other than exactly who you are, that's not the right person. But what if I'm not experienced enough? Lucia asked nervously. What if I don't know what I'm doing? Matteo smiled. Nobody knows what they're doing at first, and anyone who claims they do is probably lying. The key isn't experience, it's communication, it's paying attention, it's caring more about your partner's comfort and pleasure than about proving anything. But Papa, Lucia said hesitantly, what if I'm afraid? Of what, sweetheart? Matteo asked gently. Of not being good enough, Lucia admitted. Of disappointing someone. Of them realizing I'm not what they thought. Matteo's heart ached with recognition. He reached across the table and took her hands. Lucia, listen to me carefully. Anyone worth being with will never make you feel like you're not enough. The right person will love your inexperience because it means you get to learn together. They'll love your vulnerability because it means you trust them. They'll love exactly who you are because who you are is already perfect. He paused, then continued. Your mother and I, we were both scared and inexperienced when we met. We both thought we weren't enough. But we chose to be honest about it. We chose to communicate. We chose to learn together. And that honesty, that vulnerability, that became the foundation of everything we built. Lucia squeezed his hands. Thank you, Papa. For what? For showing me what healthy love looks like, she said. For modeling it every day. You and Mama, you're not perfect. But you're real. You fight sometimes. You make mistakes. You're not always happy. But you always come back to each other. You always work through it. That taught me more than any advice could. Matteo felt tears threatening. That's all we ever wanted, he said, to show you what real love looks like. The messy, imperfect, beautiful reality of it. When Marco was 15, he came out as gay. He was nervous, scared of how his parents would react. But Matteo and Chiara just hugged him and told him they loved him exactly as he was. We know this might be difficult in some ways, Matteo told him. The world isn't always kind to people who are different. But you have us, always, and we'll fight for your right to be exactly who you are. Thank you for trusting us with this, Chiara added. We know it takes courage to be vulnerable, and we're honored you felt safe enough with us to share. Later that night, after Marco had gone to bed visibly relieved, Chiara said to Matteo, You handled that perfectly. We handled it perfectly, Matteo corrected. But I've been thinking, we spent our whole lives trying to teach the kids that being different is okay, that being themselves is enough. Of course we were going to support him. That's not something you just say, Chiara pointed out. That's something you live. And you've lived it. Every single day you've lived it. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Matteo and Chiara renewed their vows. It was a small ceremony, just family and close friends, in the same chapel in Tuscany where they'd married. But this time, there was no nervousness, no uncertainty, just deep gratitude for 20 years of growing together. In his vows, Matteo said, 20 years ago, I promised to love you, to honor you, to grow with you. Today I can say I've kept those promises. But what I didn't know then was how much you would change me. How you would help me become someone I never imagined I could be. You taught me that vulnerability is strength, that honesty is essential, that being exactly who I am is not just enough, but everything. And for that, for you, for us, I am grateful every single day. Kiara's vows were equally moving. She said, 20 years ago, I married a man who thought he wasn't enough. Today I'm married to a man who knows his worth, not because he became someone different, but because he learned to see himself the way I've always seen him, as kind, genuine, present, and perfect exactly as he is. You gave me safety. You gave me trust. You gave me a love that has never wavered, and I would choose you 1,000 times over. Always. That night, in their hotel room, they made love with all the passion and tenderness of their first time, but with the deep knowledge and comfort of 20 years together. Afterward, Kiara said, "Do you remember our first time? How scared we both were?" "I think about it all the time," Matteo admitted. "We had no idea what we were doing." "No," Kiara agreed, "but we figured it out together. And that made all the difference." She traced patterns on his chest. "You know what I realized recently?" "What?" Matteo asked. "That our relationship worked not because we were experienced or skilled or perfect," Kiara said. "It worked because we were honest, because we communicated, because we cared more about each other than about performing. Those things matter so much more than experience." Matteo pulled her closer. "I spent so many years thinking my inexperience was a curse, that it made me less of a man. But you showed me it was actually a gift, because it meant I had to learn to communicate. I had to pay attention. I had to care about your needs and not just assume I knew what they were." "Exactly," Kiara said. "And honestly, I've had friends tell me about partners with lots of experience who were terrible lovers because they assumed they knew everything. They didn't listen. They didn't adjust. They just did what had worked with someone else. But you always listened. You always asked. You always paid attention to what I specifically needed." "That's just basic respect," Matteo said. "Which is exactly my point," Kiara said. "Basic respect and attention and care are more important than any technique. But not everyone understands that." As they approached their mid-50s, Matteo and Kiara's relationship continued to evolve. Their physical intimacy changed, as bodies do with age. But it remained deeply satisfying because it was never about performance. It was about connection. They learned to adapt, to explore new ways of bringing each other pleasure, to laugh when things didn't work quite as they used to. One evening, after a particularly wonderful intimate moment, Kiara said, "I'm so glad we built our relationship on communication and not on physical prowess. Because bodies change, abilities change. But the foundation we built, that honesty and care and attention, that never changes." Matteo agreed completely. If our relationship had been based on performance, we would have struggled. But because it's based on connection, on seeing each other completely, it just keeps getting better. Lucia graduated from university with honors. Marco followed 3 years later. Both were in healthy relationships. Both had learned from their parents how to communicate, how to be vulnerable, how to choose partners who respected them. Watching them navigate their adult lives with confidence filled Matteo and Kiara with pride. "We did something right," Kiara said one day. "We raised kids who know their worth. We gave them the tools we had to learn the hard way," Matteo agreed. On a quiet evening, 30 years after they'd first met, Matteo and Kiara sat together in their apartment in Milan. The children were grown and living their own lives. The apartment was quiet in a way it hadn't been for decades. But it wasn't an empty quiet. It was a peaceful one. Matteo looked at Kiara. Her hair now streaked with silver, laugh lines around her eyes, still the most beautiful woman he'd ever seen. 30 years, he said softly. Can you believe it? It feels both impossible and inevitable, Chiara replied, taking his hand. Like we were always meant to find each other. Matteo thought back to that autumn evening when she'd walked into his bookstore, to how scared he'd been, how certain he was that he would disappoint her, how convinced he was that he wasn't enough. If I could go back, he said, and tell that scared 34-year-old man what life would become, I don't think he'd believe me. What would you tell him? Chiara asked. That every fear he has is unnecessary, Matteo said. That he's already enough. That inexperience isn't failure, it's opportunity. That vulnerability is the greatest strength he'll ever have. That he's about to meet someone who will love him not despite his fears, but through them. And that his life is going to be more beautiful than he ever imagined possible. Chiara squeezed his hand. I'd tell my younger self something similar. That it's okay to be scared. That the right person will never rush you, or pressure you, or make you feel inadequate. That real intimacy isn't about performance, it's about presence. And that love, real love, is about acceptance, and growth, and building something together. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, just being together the way they'd been for 30 years. Then Matteo said, You know what the best part is? What? Chiara asked. We're still learning, Matteo said. Still growing. Still discovering new things about each other. After 30 years, I'm still not bored. I'm still fascinated. I still want to know what you're thinking, what you're feeling, what you're dreaming about. Me too, Chiara said softly. You still surprise me. You still make me laugh. You still make me feel seen in a way no one else ever has. That's what we built, Matteo reflected. Not just a relationship, but a partnership, a friendship, a shared life built on honesty,